8 o'clock. Good morning. This is Northern Light for Wednesday, May 24th. I'm Todd Moe. The ferry that's a lifeline for residents of Wolfe Island has been struggling with mechanical and labor problems for months, stranding people for hours and sometimes overnight in Kingston, Ontario.
What has angered a lot of people lately is that the ferry operators have sort of announced a few hours before that, the ferry's going out of service overnight.
The DEC is 2 years into a study to learn more about the main threats to moose in the Adirondacks.
We are sort of keeping a careful eye on what they're finding, because what we're trying to get some idea of is, at what densities should we be concerned?
One big problem is parasites, especially liver fluke. We'll have more on that story. Also, Governor Kathy Hochul is walking a fine line in the feud between President Joe Biden and New York City Mayor Eric Adams over the migrant crisis.
Instead of standing on the steps of City Hall, we should be standing on the steps of the White House and asking, what are you doing to the city of New York?
And the importance of proper splitting and drying of firewood. Stay tuned for Northern Light. Broadcast of Northern Light here on North Country Public Radio is supported by Mountain Orthotic and Prosthetic Services, a full-service practice committed to providing care for patients of all ages, with offices in Lake Placid, Plattsburgh, and Malone. Details and referrals at mountainonp.com. And by Blue Seed Studios, Saranac Lake, promoting community involvement in the arts on the web at bluseedstudios.org. This is Northern Light. I'm Todd Moe. Monica has the day off. The evening of Mother's Day, a couple of weeks ago, the ferry that connects Wolfe Island with mainland Canada in Kingston went out of service due to a mechanical failure. The ferry didn't run again until well past the beginning of the workday Monday morning.
It was Mother's Day. People were visiting relatives out of town, so they expected to come back and catch a ferry at 8 p.m., 9 p.m., 10 p.m., and then they arrive in Kingston, and there's no ferry until the morning.
The ferry's been a point of frustration for more than a year now for the 1,400 people who live year-round on Wolfe Island, which is where Lake Ontario empties into the St. Lawrence River. The island population balloons to several thousand residents and tourists in the summer. The ferry serves almost 1 million passengers a year. Elliot Ferguson has been covering the story for the Kingston Whig Standard. He spoke with David Summerstein.
It's an important link for commuters on a daily basis. There's a lot of people who take the ferry from the island into Kingston to work. Any supplies or materials that islanders need at their homes has to come across on the ferry. It's a major tourism link. There's an international border crossing on the south side of Wolfe Island, which the highway from that leads directly to the ferry and then over onto the mainland. So it's the Wolfe Islander 3 is a link in that international route. What has happened in the last year is the frequency of unscheduled delays. Everyone knows that, on a long weekend in the summer, you're going to wait for the ferry probably. But what has angered a lot of people lately is that the ferry operators have sort of announced a few hours before that, the ferry's going out of service overnight, or ferry's going to be out of service for several hours for various reasons. People need to plan for that, and when it gets sprung on them at the last minute, they get upset.
So aside from, the tourist sort of midsummer kind of delays that are understandable, what's causing all these unexpected delays?
Well, that ferry is 50 years old. So there are mechanical breakdowns, engine problems, hydraulic problems. It's an aging vessel. What's new in the past year or so are crew shortages. The MTO is having difficulty maintaining crew levels. They've had to rely on temporary services to fill the crew ranks, and there are times when the ferry just cannot go because they don't have enough crew to staff it.
As I understand it, complicating this whole thing is that the government had bought a whole new ferry, that there's a whole new ferry that's been docked for a long time, and it was only recently brought into service?
No, actually, it is not in service.
Oh, wow.
Yes, the Wolf Islander 4 was one of two all-electric ferries. There's the Wolf Islander 4 and the Amherst Islander 2. They arrived, it's almost 18 months ago from Europe, where they were built. And there was a lot of excitement when they arrived because they were supposed to be in service within a few months. That didn't work out. Partly there have been delays in the reconstruction of the terminals, both in Kingston and I believe also in Marysville on the island, and that has delayed the new ferries from coming to service. Plus, I mean, given that the government is having trouble finding crew for the current ferry, I think adding an entirely new crew for a bigger ferry is not something that the government is able to do at this point. So the Wolf Islander 4, it had been docked in Picton for most of its time in Canada. It is now docked in Marysville at Wolf Island. The Islanders can see the new ferry that has yet to come into service and make their life easier.
Well, that's awfully frustrating for residents, I'm sure, and for Canadian Ontario taxpayers who are like, "Hey, we bought this huge ferry and it's not even being used." How is the government responding? I mean, is there a lot of pressure on the government to do something?
Well, the local member of parliament, Ted Hsu, brought it up at Queen's Park on Monday because it was fresh in everyone's mind at that point. It's just a matter of getting the needed crew trained and into service. The government has said that there's a shortage of marine workers everywhere, so it's not easy to get these people. The union representing the ferry workers has said that the government is just not funding it enough, and they need to put more funds into hiring the crew that they need to safely operate the ferries.
So it sounds like there could be a lot more frustrating delays of the ferry still to come.
Well, the new ferry we were promised it was going to be in service last spring. We were again promised that it was going to be in service this spring. So my understanding is that the new ferry can dock at the existing terminals. So my understanding is that it could be brought into service if only there were crew to operate it.
Elliot Ferguson is a reporter with the Kingston Whig Standard. He spoke with David Summerstein. The new head of the U.S. side of the St. Lawrence Seaway is visiting Messina today. Administrator Adam Tyndall Schlicht will tour the new tugboat, the Seaway Trident, at the Eisenhower Lock this morning. The Trident was built in Maine and has been making its way north in the Atlantic and up the St. Lawrence River since late April. It arrived in Messina on May 3rd. The tug will handle regular maintenance duties, including ice breaking in the channel between Messina's two locks, setting and removing navigation aids, and emergency response. Tyndall Schlicht was appointed administrator by President Joe Biden last November. He succeeds Betty Sutton, a congresswoman from Ohio, who was appointed under President Obama. As New York's migrant crisis intensifies, Governor Hochul is caught in the middle of a political dispute between New York City Mayor Eric Adams and President Joe Biden over how to deal with the influx of an estimated 80,000 asylum seekers to New York City. Karen DeWitt reports from Albany.
Mayor Adams has drawn the ire of the Biden administration over his criticism of how the federal government has handled the migrant crisis. New York City has been overwhelmed with as many as 5,800 asylum seekers coming each week, most bused from states including Texas and Florida. Adams has proposed transferring some migrants to upstate hotels or housing them in school gymnasiums, but those ideas have been met with opposition and controversy. In late April, a frustrated Adams lashed out, saying the national government has turned its back.
Instead of standing on the steps of City Hall, we should be standing on the steps of the White House and asking the national government, what are you doing to the city of New York?
Adams' words resulted in him being dropped by the Biden Campaign Advisory Board. Adams, the highest-profile African-American mayor in the country, could have been a key surrogate to help Biden win over more voters in the presidential race. Adams later said that his critique is not about politics and that he'd do everything possible to see Biden reelected. Governor Hochul is a close ally of President Biden, and she is just one of 2 Democrats in New York who is on the president's re-election advisory board. Nevertheless, Hochul presented a unified front with Adams, along with several New York members of Congress, to ask Biden and Congress for more help and to praise Adams' efforts so far.
For the way you just stood up to this challenge, didn't run away, didn't shirk it, and said, let's figure this out.
Hochul, Adams, and some members of Congress, including Jerry Nadler and Dan Goldman, are asking for the Biden administration to waive the 6-month waiting period that migrants must follow before they are allowed to work. They say there are plenty of jobs available in New York for them to fill. Hochul was careful not to disparage the president, saying she hopes that he and his aides will listen to their request. And she says she's pleased with the new border admissions process that replaced the pandemic-era regulations known as Title 42. Asylum seekers are now required to first apply for relief and seek sponsorship from their own countries before they can cross the border into the United States.
We're grateful that the Biden administration has instituted a new border process.
There's some dispute over whether the president could issue an executive order to waive the 100-day waiting period for the migrants or whether it requires an act of Congress. Biden is a Democrat and the U.S. Senate is narrowly controlled by Democrats, but Republicans lead the House. The highest-ranking Republican in New York State government, Senate Minority Leader Robert Ortt, says he disagrees with waiving the 100-day waiting period for employment. He says the rule is in place to ensure public safety.
The reason it takes so long now is because there's a security and a vetting process that has to happen. You have people who have shown up that we don't know what their background is. We don't know where they're from. We don't know their history.
The governor, mayor, and New York's congressional representatives don't seem to be making any headway so far on the issue. Hochul, speaking Monday, said Biden hasn't said yes to her request, but he also has not rejected the idea.
We're working with the White House. We've not received a flat no.
In the meantime, the recently approved state budget includes $1 billion to help New York City take care of its migrants. And the governor says she's eyeing state properties, including unused former prisons and psychiatric centers, as well as temporarily vacant SUNY dorms to house the migrants, whose numbers are expected to grow in the coming weeks. In Albany, I'm Karen DeWitt.
This is North Country Public Radio. You are listening to Northern Light. It's 14 minutes past 8. Good morning. I'm Todd Moe. Monica Zandreski has the day off. Coming up in just a moment, an update on a moose study in the Adirondacks and tips for drying and stacking firewood. Stay tuned. Northern Light, supported by Fort de la Presentation, helping to educate and recreate historical ventures of interest to the St. Lawrence region, fort1749.org. And St. Lawrence Health, offering My Care, a way for patients to access health information and stay connected to their care team. Registration is available at stlawrencehealthsystem.org. Music by Zoe Knight out of Potsdam. Check out more regional music on our website, ncpr.org/_. The State Department of Environmental Conservation is 2 years into a study to learn more about main threats to moose in the Adirondacks. Monica Sandreski has more.
Moose have kind of a spotty history in the Adirondack Park.
Moose were extirpated or went locally extinct in New York State in the mid-1800s.
Paul Jensen is the wildlife manager in the Adirondacks with the DEC.
And that was most likely due to, wide-scale habitat loss as well as unregulated hunting.
Then a big shift happened in 1980. Moose started coming back. Populations were increasing across New England as timber harvesting ramped up.
At that time, we were seeing, what we think were moose coming from Vermont in particular and southern Quebec coming into the state, crossing Lake Champlain, coming around the sort of the southern end of Lake George. And, we just really saw a large increase in those sightings during that time.
The DEC has conducted a series of studies with Cornell and SUNY ESF over the years to keep tabs on adult moose survival. Now they're in year 2 of a study to track what limits moose populations. A big one? Parasites. Moose in the Northeast and Midwest are dealing with winter ticks, which can latch onto moose by the thousands. Jensen says he works closely with scientists at environmental departments in Maine, New Hampshire, and Minnesota.
And they're kind of looking at us, I think, sometimes with, nostalgia, because we will share photos of some of our moose, and they say to us, "Wow, look at the condition. Look at great condition those moose are in. They're doing so well. That's what our moose used to look like."
Winter ticks are density dependent. More moose, more winter ticks.
We are sort of keeping a careful eye on what they're finding, because what we're trying to get some idea of is, at what densities should we be concerned?
Jensen says the parasite that's a more immediate concern in the Adirondacks is liver fluke. It infects snails, which moose inadvertently consume when they're eating water plants. Of the 31 moose they tagged, 5 of them that died had an infestation of liver fluke.
It actually will cause these parasites to essentially obliterate the liver.
They don't know liver fluke's actual impact on mortality. He's hopeful that this study will help them better understand that and also understand climate change's potential impact on moose populations. They've got 1 year left of field research. Monica Sandreski, North Country Public Radio.
A major figure in the Central Adirondacks has died. Captain Dean Pohl founded the Racket Lake Navigation Company in 1981. He and his wife Donna offered popular sunset and dinner cruises in their massive ship, the W.W. Durant. Since the 70s, Pohl also owned a construction company that built single-family camps and homes, specializing in those accessible only by water. Pohl sold the boat cruising business to his children, Rachel and Jim, who continue to operate it. Pohl died at home last Thursday. He was 80 years old. Get more news all the time on our website at ncpr.org. You're listening to Northern Light here on North Country Public Radio. I'm Todd Moe. Thanks so much for joining us. While many of us are focused on gardening and spring cleaning, a Potsdam man is on a crusade of sorts to make sure people are splitting and stacking their firewood properly. It's not about the aesthetics, but helping those who heat with wood make the process safer and more economical. Miles Manchester has cut wood and heated his St. Lawrence County home for decades. His focus recently has been the book Norwegian Wood, Chopping, Stacking, and Drying Wood the Scandinavian Way, and its extended essay on the art and science of turning forests into firewood. Woodcutting is almost a cult in Scandinavia and here in the North Country. I caught up with Miles Manchester and Mark Baumier, president of the St. Lawrence County Fire Chiefs Association. Wood stove chimney fires are always a concern, and Miles Manchester is hoping to curb that problem by teaching more people the proper way of cutting, splitting, and stacking firewood with a little help from the Norwegians.
Mark Baumier, Rensselaer Falls Fire Department. Been in the fire service now for 43 years. I currently am the president of the County Chiefs Association.
I'm Miles Manchester. My interest in this is more at a personal level. I've been burning wood most of my life. I've been reading about it a lot over the years, and I came across this particular book titled Norwegian Wood that I believe is the best thing I've ever read about the process of getting wood from the tree to the stove or furnace, and how wood dries, the technical aspects of the different species of wood, and what can either speed up or slow down the process of drying. So I connected with Mark because of trying to get this information out into the fire departments.
The bottom line for both of you here is fire prevention, because chimney fires are probably something your departments are dealing with all the time.
Yes. Well, Miles actually approached me asking about the educational aspects of the fire companies and fire departments. And we do education, public education for a lot of that stuff. We don't get involved with installation or how people can cut their wood or what they should do with it. We always recommend that you go to a professional and have them do the install. The problem today is as oil prices rise, people install their own fire burning apparatus, and they cut their own wood and they don't dry it well, and we have chimney fires. We've had more chimney fires this year than we had in the previous couple of years. Maintenance, drying of the wood, like Miles is talking about, and drying it properly, and installation, incorrect installation, because they don't use the correct wood stove pipe, or they might stick it out the window. I mean, there's a lot of people, we've seen stovepipes that literally sticking out of a window, and that's it, things like that.
And I know, Miles, when we first talked about this, I asked you whether we should talk in September or October about firewood, and you said no. Now is the time to talk about it, even in the spring, because of that very issue Mark just mentioned with letting that wood season and dry, right?
Well, there's 2 points I'd like to bring up right now. You mentioned creosote, and I'm jumping ahead of myself here. When creosote burns in a chimney, the quote from this book here, it says, the temperature will rise to as much as 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit, 2,200 degrees. That stuff is extremely flammable, and your even good stainless steel chimneys are not designed to take that heat. But you might have 2 or 3 fires before the inside of that chimney falls apart, and then all the insulation falls apart, and then you've got no insulation. And if you're dealing with a masonry chimney, those clay blocks will take a lot of heat, but they can't stand quick changes in temperature. So if you get a really hot creosote fire, you can crack those liners, and then you've got creosote leaking inside the space between the liners and the cement blocks. Mm-hmm. And you've got another disaster waiting to happen. So the creosote is one of these books refers to creosote as the black plague of wood stoves. And the other point I'd like to bring up at this point is the good news is that wood dries remarkably fast if it is chopped, split quickly after felling. So, the old story that you have to dry your wood for a year to dry it, or if it's oak, you have to dry it 2 years. There are so many variables about when you cut, how quickly you split it, how quickly you get it stacked, and how much ventilation, and if you can get it into sunshine. They're just tremendous variables, but if you find out what are all the factors that go into drying your wood and then come up with the best combination of factors for your own circumstances, you can dry wood remarkably quickly. And so the old story that you have to dry your wood for a full year is a myth. It's not a bad myth in a way because it encourages people to store their wood longer. But in fact, if you find yourself in circumstances where you don't have that full amount of time, if you do all the right things, you can make a huge difference and get that wood drier than you would otherwise.
And just to back up, you're quoting from the Norwegian Wood book.
This is the book, Norwegian Wood, written by an author named Lars, I believe it's pronounced Mytting, Mytting. My church is donating a copy of this book to any fire department in St. Lawrence County that would like to have a copy. And the logic there is, I'm almost certain, that at least one person in every fire department in St. Lawrence County burns wood or has close relatives that burn wood. So there will be people with an interest in this. And this is about getting information out into community. And I see local firemen as being so dispersed that there's a potential network of information that could be at work there that I'd like to tap into.
Well, we're sitting next to a fireman, so let me ask Mark, do you burn wood at your house?
Actually, I don't.
Okay.
I used to.
Yeah.
I had an outdoor wood boiler, and I stopped burning it for numerous reasons. One of them is because the fuel prices were going down, so I've changed over to fuel.
You would definitely sort of recommend that people, study the stuff that Miles is talking about if they want to burn wood?
Yes. Yeah. Done properly, there's thousands and thousands of people who have burned wood for their entire lives and never had a problem. So the thing is, you just have to learn how to do it safely.
There's a section in here that talks about what happens when you cut wood, but you don't split it right away, and bacteria begins to work on the wood. This one chapter is probably this one page is probably one of the most critical pieces of information that was somewhat new to me, the criticalness of getting that wood split and stacked quickly. That is, if you're going to dry your logs out in the winter and leave them laying on the ground until whenever you get around to cutting it up, the heating value of all your wood is going downhill all the time that wood is laying there.
So your advice is, if you're cutting the firewood, cut, split, and stack. Don't cut and leave it for 6 months and come back and split it in the fall. Or something.
That wood has deteriorated. Yeah. One final thing that's also really important that was somewhat new to me was this top-down method of starting a fire.
Ask you about that. Yeah.
Top-down method. Traditionally, the method was you put some kindling and some paper or maybe something else down in the bottom, and then you started stacking wood on top of it, so the fire you lit down at the bottom. Well, in Norway, they actually did a national campaign back, I think, in the 1980s to get people to start using a top-down method. And the logic there is those gases that start coming out of the wood begin as the wood heats up. That starts happening at around 250 or 300 degrees. That means if you started your fire from the bottom, the temperature at the top of the wood stove firebox is not hot enough to burn those gases. Whereas if you start your fire at the top with good kindling, then the temperature at the top of the firebox gets hot much faster, and you start to burn up that fuel that would otherwise just go up the chimney unburned. So I really would recommend studying the concept of the top-down fire and see if you can improve your efficiency that way. And one other thing happens with that is you don't have to open your door of your stove again until the whole thing is hot, because smoke coming back in the house is a problem. And so that top-down method works good in terms of you don't have to reopen it. In closing, I got 50 copies of this book ready to go out to fire departments, and I created a specific email address, and it's pretty simple: dryfirewood23. That's one word, dryfirewood23 is this year, 23, at gmail.com. I will really make sure I get back to anybody that's referencing a fire department in St. Lawrence County. I'll try